What's up, everyone? As promised, I'm going to take a look at the Vikings' spectacular young safety, Harrison Smith, today. But before I do, I just got to say one thing about the Minnesota defense as a whole that I came to understand when I was watching them. When these guys are healthy and firing on all cylinders, holy shit, they are unbelievable to watch. I had so much fun charting tape for this team. They dealt with a lot of nagging injuries last year to key players like Linval Joseph, Sharif Floyd, Anthony Barr, Everson Griffin, and even Harrison Smith himself. But by the end of the season, when everyone got healthy at the same time, they were arguably the most well-rounded and most versatile defense in the entire NFL. They've got all-pro caliber talents on every level of that unit, and that shows in their flexibility from week to week. They've got so many great players that they can basically play any defense they want to. Cover 3, cover 1, cover 2, a bunch of cover 4 and cover 6, press man coverage, off man coverage, pattern matching zones, spot drop zones, whatever. Anything they want. They can get to the quarterback with just 4 guys, or if they really want to turn up the heat, they have great second-level blitzers in Anthony Barr and Harrison Smith that can beat the shit out of running backs in pass protection. They have literally no personnel limitations, which helps them so much with game planning. They can do anything. For instance, they ran a lot of 2-deep looks like cover 2 and cover 4 against the Raiders and kept the box fairly soft. But against the Packers, they were mostly in single high defenses like cover 1 and cover 3. They can play both styles just fine. They can bump and run with you, they can play off, they can play zone. It really just depends on what their game plan is that week against whatever their opponent happens to do best. Now, more often than not, Mike Zimmer was in single high looks because he likes to use those safeties to set the edge against the run and drive everything back inside into the linebackers and defensive line. But Zimmer's version of a single high defense is way different than what you might be used to seeing in places like Seattle or Jacksonville or Baltimore. From the tape I've watched, they don't actually have a true free safety or a true strong safety. They don't align based on the strength of the offensive formation where the tight end lines up. They don't even have a simple left safety, right safety system. Instead, they seem to align based on where the ball is spotted. In the majority of snaps I charted in the games I watched, Harrison Smith was aligned on what's called the boundary side of the field. There's the boundary side and the field side, for those who don't know. The boundary side of the field, when the ball is spotted on the hash marks, is the shorter side of the field. There's less space to work with. The field side of the field, and I know that sounds super confusing, but just stay with me. The field side is the wider side of the field with more space to work with. So Smith, most of the time, was lined up on that boundary side, regardless of whether it was technically considered the strong side of the formation or the weak side. Where the tight end lined up did not seem to impact Minnesota's safety alignment at all. So technically, on a snap-to-snap basis, Smith could be the strong safety, and then the free safety, and then the strong safety again without ever actually changing sides of the field. That means that both of Minnesota's safeties basically have to know how to play both positions and play every single role. And that responsibility extends to the linebackers too, because I noticed that they also align the same way. Anthony Barr is thought to be a strong side outside linebacker, but really he was lining up on that boundary side most of the time too. So technically he was sometimes a Sam, technically sometimes he was a Will. And that doesn't mean that both were on the boundary side all the time. There were plenty of snaps where both of them were on the field side, or in some cases one was on the boundary side and one was on the field side based on whatever call Zimmer handed down. But I'm saying that the majority of snaps I charted followed this specific pattern of a boundary side and a field side alignment, not a traditional strong side and weak side alignment that you would see elsewhere. Now, corners almost never switch sides. Regardless of the alignment or where the ball was spotted, Xavier Rhodes was always going to be the right corner. Terrence Newman was always going to be the left corner. Those guys never changed at all. The defensive ends also never seemed to switch. Everson Griffin on the right, Brian Robison on the left at all times. Linval Joseph and Sharif Floyd, however, the defensive tackles, would switch sides based on the strength of the offensive formation. So that's 3 different alignment rules for 4 different position groups. Corners align based on their pre-assigned side of the field, as do defensive ends. Defensive tackles align based on formation strength, and linebackers and safeties align based on where the ball is spotted. That means that basically based on a bunch of different factors, the Vikings might actually line up a different way on literally every single snap of a series, even if the play call is the same, because of all their different little alignment rules for each position. It's really fascinating to watch how multiple this defense can be just based on alignment. And it took me way longer to figure that out than I would care to admit, but that seems to be how they operate as a unit. That's the pattern that I saw. So that's the Vikings defense at a very macro level. I know it's a very rough crash course, but you'll need all that information to put Harrison Smith's performance into context, because alignment in this defense is basically key to everything. When you look at how Mike Zimmer uses Smith, whether he's on the boundary side, the field side, the strong side, the weak side, whatever you want to call it, most of the time he's going to be down near the line of scrimmage. I know he's officially listed as a free safety. Ignore that. He is not a free safety. He's not a strong safety. He is a run game destroying, quarterback blitzing, edge securing terror that allows the rest of his defense to function in their own unique way. His role, when it really comes down to it, when he's down near that line of scrimmage, is to obliterate all hope of the ball going outside of him, run or pass, and to make the opponent deal with that ultra-talented front seven head-on right up the middle. He forces you to deal with Linval Joseph. He forces you to deal with Anthony Barr. He forces you to deal with Everson Griffin. That is his value. Zimmer loves using Smith as what's called, as you can probably guess, a force player, meaning he's forcing that ball back inside. Because if these defensive ends and defensive tackles and linebackers don't have to worry about playing force, that means they're free to just attack, and attack again inside to disrupt plays in the backfield and take offenses off schedule. You saw that right here with Everson Griffin getting this 5-yard tackle for loss against the Packers in Week 17. Smith is playing force against the power run at a pistol formation, meaning he's setting a hard edge, which then allows Griffin to do what he does best and bust through inside to make a play. If you have a safety as good as Smith, who's insanely physical and extremely reliable as a tackler in space, then you can get away with him being your primary force player. That's the biggest part of Smith's role on this team. His mere presence alone allows Mike Zimmer to use Everson Griffin, arguably his best athlete, in this kind of way. Not every team has this luxury. And speaking of Smith being physical on the edge, his reputation as a run defender outside the hashes is very quickly approaching Troy Polamalu levels of ridiculousness. When you watch him prowl around that line of scrimmage, when you watch him set that edge, when you watch him blitz into the backfield and make a giant play, I swear to God, he looks just like Troy. They're the same guy. It's incredible. Off the field, they're quiet, unassuming people, but on the field, Smith plays with that same unmistakable, primal, almost animalistic play style that I've only ever really seen in Troy Polamalu before. He doesn't just pursue ball carriers, he hunts them down as if he resents their very existence. You look at him against the Packers in Week 11 here, one of the very first plays of the game. Green Bay is running zone to his side, the backbone of their run offense. Smith IDs it and pulls the trigger immediately to come hard downhill, and then right away looks to James Jones to see if he's coming to crack down on him. Smith wants that contact. He wants to go right through James Jones' ribcage to get to that ball. He relishes this kind of scenario, and that's what sets him apart from a lot of people. And you can see that James Jones wants no part of Harrison Smith head on. You can see that he doesn't want that. That's the difference in mentality between Smith and a lot of other players. He wants to destroy you. James Jones, however, clearly does not. Now, the running back had to cut away from Smith anyway before we ever got to see him lay the wood, but I love seeing Smith look to blow up his blocker regardless of where that ball's going. Against the Chargers, an even better example of him establishing that the edge is his territory. Smith is lined up outside the tight end again as a force player. Prior to the snap, though, Smith notices Danny Woodhead motion across. He reads that the end around is coming. So he stacks in the tight end and immediately works to that outside shoulder to establish that force position early. Now the receiver's also cracking down on Smith from behind, so really he's drawing two blockers here. But that doesn't even really affect him because he just reaches one paw out there through a double team and drags down Woodhead with one hand for a 4-yard loss on the play. This snap right here, that's Harrison Smith. Danny Woodhead, one of the slipperiest guys to tackle in the entire National Football League, was just brought down by Smith with one hand while taking on a double team. How many other safeties in the league do you think can do that? How many safeties in the league do you think have ever been able to do that? And then to go out on the next snap and take Woodhead in coverage and stick with him stride for stride? The fact that Smith can do both of those things flawlessly is what makes him a rare player in the mold of Troy Polamalu. This is so unbelievably rare to see in a safety. I can't drive that home enough. And speaking of coverage, other than his obvious gifts as a run defender, a tackler, and a blitzer, I do want to talk about how the Vikings handle coverage. Now, I mentioned their alignments earlier and how they can basically play any style of coverage they want, and that's absolutely true. But if you want to know how the Vikings handle pass defense in a nutshell, this is it. This defensive look right here is the very foundation of everything they do. Double A gap pressure, single high safety coverages. It can be zone, it can be man, they might send delayed blitzes, they might just cut to the chase and show them pre-snap, or they might sugar their blitzes and drop out of them post-snap like they do here. All of their options are basically built off the same concept, this one right here. And that goes double against 3 wide looks because they saw those on the field basically more than any other personnel grouping on offense. So first thing you need to know about how this works, the linebackers are the wild cards. They are virtually always going to be lined up inside. Zimmer doesn't really flex them to play man coverage outside the hashes basically ever, unless they're seeing empty formations or something unusual like that. Man coverage in the slot is the job of the safeties and the slot corner on the other side. And by that I mean mostly Harrison Smith and, at the time, Captain Munnerlyn. Now, Zimmer doesn't flex out his linebackers because he always wants there to be a possibility that he's going to be blitzing him up those A-gaps and wreaking havoc. He wants that to be in the quarterback's mind at all times, that any given snap, these linebackers can be coming up the gut. Interior pressure, especially through blitzing, is Mike Zimmer's trademark. If he's sending his linebackers out wide into coverage, then he's not able to blitz them, so he's always going to have them inside. More often than not, those linebackers will be playing match zone coverage underneath and over the middle to discourage things like slants, drags, crosses, etc., from being thrown. In the case of this play, Kendricks is in his usual field side alignment while Barr's on the boundary side. When they initially drop out of their pre-snap blitz look into their zones, if you pay attention to Captain Munnerlyn against Randall Cobb in the slot, he actually concedes the inside release to Cobb by design because he knows he has Kendricks inside of him in a shallow zone, effectively creating a bracket double team. Now, normally in man coverage, you never want to let a receiver cross your face inside because you become vulnerable to slants like this. But in Minnesota's case, they're actually counting on that because they know that they will always have zone help to the inside, and if you throw the slant, they're going to pick it off or at the very least break it up. They would rather have their slot defenders leveraged outside and playing against things like out routes and fades than have them worry about slants and drags. This is also a great way to counter option routes because now you have defenders leveraged on both sides of you and you don't really have anywhere to go. That's how man coverage and zone coverage work together in this defense. However, if a running back goes out into a pass pattern, then all of a sudden that back becomes the man coverage responsibility of whatever linebacker is on the side that the pattern is being run, whether it's field side or boundary side. Richard Rodgers, ostensibly playing the role of a fullback here, leaks out to the field side, so he immediately becomes Kendricks' responsibility because that's the side that Kendricks lined up on. Anthony Barr hangs out in his zone underneath as he's supposed to, while Smith takes John Kuhn leaking out to the boundary side. Look at Aaron Rodgers' eyes here. He's got nowhere to go from the very beginning of this play. The Vikings linebackers were showing blitz pre-snap, so he put Richard Rodgers in protection in the A-gap to help block that rush. He didn't expect them to drop out of it, so when Kendricks was sitting on that slant from Cobb, which would have been open if Minnesota went through with their blitz, Rodgers was screwed. He looks to the boundary side, but he's got nothing there, comes back to Cobb, but now Barr's sitting on the slant. Kendricks moves over to take Rodgers in coverage. He's got nothing, nobody to throw to because of the perfect execution and the perfect scheming by Mike Zimmer. What undoes all of this, though, is Minnesota's front four not capitalizing and getting home for a sack. They let Aaron Rodgers escape, and Xavier Rhodes gives up a big gain to James Jones when he and Rodgers go into their usual improv mode that nobody ever seems to be able to stop. I can't really fault any of the secondary or the linebackers for this. They did their job. They played their coverage correctly. The defensive line just dropped the ball. From earlier in that same game, same kind of coverage concept, but from a different personnel grouping now and a different pre-snap look. Minnesota's in their base defense here, showing a two-deep coverage. But just before the snap, they roll into that same single high look. Andrew Sendejo takes Richard Rodgers in man coverage with outside leverage, while Anthony Barr takes Andrew Corliss. Both Eric Kendricks and Chad Greenway are both playing those underneath zones as they were before, and they're sitting on the slants or drags that those tight ends or receivers might be running over the middle. At the same time, Greenway and Kendricks are keying in on James Starks to see if he's going to run a route as well. If he breaks left, he's Greenway's. If he breaks right, he's Kendricks's. Again, Rodgers doesn't have anywhere to go initially because Greenway is sitting on that slant just inside of Cobb. But amazingly, shocker, once again, Rodgers escapes, rolls out, and he's got the other Rodgers on a 9-yard scramble drill. Now, I know this is starting to look like an Aaron Rodgers highlight tape. I didn't mean it to be. But this is just to illustrate how effective these coverages can be, assuming that their defensive line can get their heads out of their asses and actually get a sack. If they don't actually capitalize on the good coverage, it just kind of falls apart against a guy as talented as Rodgers, because once he escapes, there's really no better quarterback in the league at throwing on the run. They ran this kind of coverage a lot against every single opponent, and Smith had to play a lot of man and zone coverages on tight ends, on running backs, and on slot receivers in order to make this work. They didn't trust Andrew Sendejo to handle man coverage as much as Smith, so naturally he was down in the box in this role a lot more often, and he handled it extremely well. He's not quite as athletically gifted in man coverage as, say, Eric Berry or Malcolm Jenkins or Tyrann Mathieu, and all those guys are kind of the gold standard for safeties playing man coverage these days. But when you factor in that he's a better run stopper than all these guys, and arguably a better blitzer, I'm willing to accept great man coverage rather than elite man coverage. That is absolutely a worthy trade-off to me. If Smith does have one outright weakness, though, he's not quite as rangy as some of the better center fielding safeties in this league either, like Earl Thomas, Tayshaun Gibson, or Reggie Nelson. He's not slow, but he can get exposed here and there in his recovery speed if he's trying to keep up with like legit 4-4 receivers deep down the field. He plays down in the line of scrimmage so often, though, that it really doesn't matter all that much because he's not really in that position that often. He's better at bracketing guys and physically challenging bigger jump ball receivers rather than trying to run in the hip pocket of deep threats all game. That's not really his strength, and that's okay. He's still extremely quick in short areas, he's still got fluid hips, and he's more than capable of handling coverage responsibilities underneath against slot receivers, running backs, and tight ends. I'm okay with the long speed being average as long as he's still an elite in-the-box safety in the role that the Vikings play him in anyway, and he absolutely is elite in that in-the-box role. There are a lot of really good safeties in the NFL right now. The Seattle duo, of course, that everybody knows. You've got Berry, Gibson, Nelson, like I mentioned, Jenkins, Mathieu, Rodney McLeod, TJ McDonald, Rashad Jones, Byron Jones, Devin McCourty, TJ Ward, Eric Weddle, Glover Quinn, Morgan Burnett. The list goes on and on. There's just so many good ones in this league. There's a legitimate argument to be made, however, that Harrison Smith is more valuable than all of them. He's an elite run stopper at the point of attack. He's an elite blitzer. He's extremely instinctive. He's disruptive in the backfield. He's a leader in the locker room. He shuts down tight ends and running backs in coverage. He can even take slot receivers from time to time. He does literally everything well, if not much better than that. Many safeties in this league are highly specialized and have certain body types to fill specific roles and very particular schemes. Harrison Smith, though, can play on any team. He already plays in every single style of coverage in Minnesota. They pride themselves on their versatility up there. That's what they do. And his presence allows their entire front seven to play their best possible game. For that and that alone, he is arguably the most valuable player on that entire defense. And that's saying something considering he plays next to Anthony Barr, Linval Joseph, Everson Griffin, all of them elite players in their own right. Harrison Smith is a special football player, and as I said earlier, he is a more than worthy successor to the great Troy Polamalu as the absolute undisputed best box safety in the game. Alright, that's all I got for now, guys. Next time, I think I'm going to take a good look at a slightly younger player in the league. You probably know him, Amari Cooper. I've broken him down before on this channel in college, but this time I want to go back and see how he did in his 2 games against another sensational rookie, Marcus Peters. These two could be on the verge of being the next big receiver-cornerback rivalry in the NFL, and I want to see what made both of them so special as rookies. Until then, later.